Hello, welcome to Real Life, Real Leaders. Today, our guest is Janice Lynn. She's the Chief Investment Officer for Revera Incorporated, and she has a background in finance, real estate, and investment. Welcome to the program, Janice.
Thank you.
So I'm really excited to have you on the program. We are fellow network members in the Women Execs on Boards. We both went through the same program at Harvard and then joined a network afterwards where a lot of women work together. A lot of very high-level women are working together to support each other as we get on corporate boards. So Janice, you've had a pretty amazing career so far. You're in the middle of it. But tell us a little bit about you. Where are you from? And how did you get into this line of work?
Well, that's the story. So I grew up in Southern California. And when I was younger, my parents and my whole family is all physicians. I'm the black sheep that didn't go into medicine. And like most immigrant families, they viewed real estate as a security and a way to ensure wealth creation for the future. So my parents owned multifamily and at their peak had 100 units. But being very frugal immigrants, they refused to have a third party manage it. So after they had their long days at the hospital, they would go and be cleaning units, dealing with tenants, collecting rent, etc. Wow. And I remember this one moment, I was probably 7 or 8, pre-cell phone days, right? So my dad comes into the garage. He's like yelling in the garage. I come out. I'm like, what are you? And I'm like, what's he doing? He's standing in the middle of the garage. He's like, go get your mother. Get my mom. She brings out clothes for him. He basically stripped down in the garage, hosed himself off, like threw away his clothes. And I'm like, what's going on? He had gone to clean out a unit that was full of fleas. And so he had these fleas jumping off of him.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like, I never want to do that. Real estate seems like an awful, awful profession where you're working so hard. I don't understand what the value is. I'm like, that's not going to be for me. But that being said, I went through high school and decided, I don't think medicine is for me. I want to try my hand at whatever this business thing is. So I applied across the country, was fortunate enough to get into Wharton undergrad. I went there, was going through classes. They have a real estate major. And I wasn't really interested in it. And it was probably like end of my second or third year. And I thought, I'll just take a class and see. And I'll tell you, it was real estate finance. I sat in that row and I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. It was, I loved how it was a tactile investment that you could see and touch. You could break it down into numbers, the way the tax codes work in the US, everything, it just hooked me. And I was one of the few women in my year that majored in real estate along with a couple other majors, walked with the real estate at graduation, and was again fortunate enough to be able to gain a position in real estate investment banking back on the West Coast, back in California, back in sunshine and warmth.
I was going to say, you didn't love the weather in Philadelphia? Come on.
No, it wasn't my cup of tea. But, I went through that. It was a great experience. Moved over to the equity research side with a shop that specifically focuses on real estate investment trusts, and then went back to business school at HBS. And at business school, tried something different over the summer, realized, no, I need to be in finance. I love the numbers. I love being able to get to an answer, use my assumptions. And I'm like, I'm going to get closer to the assets. And so I was, again, fortunate enough to be able to land a role in real estate private equity where I could learn nuts and bolts from the ground up of how to actually value something, how to get the deal, how to negotiate the deal, how to manage it and bring it all the way through. And I had a fantastic managing director that I worked very closely with at that first job, and so lucky to land with him, a great VP that just took me along. And I just, on every trip, every tour, I just sat next to them, heard what they were doing, learned the business alongside that mentor. And he's continued to be a mentor to this day. Fast forward to 2010 or 2009, actually, and CPPIB, Canada Pension Plan Investment Board at that time, was really changed. They changed their mandate for direct investing in the U.S. out of Toronto. I had a friend whose father was working there. The father said to me, why don't you apply? I said, Toronto's not on my list of places I wanted to live in my life. Just really wasn't interested.
Well, where do you live in California?
Well, I did live in Los Angeles, grew up in Orange County, and it's like nowhere else on earth. I'll say that unabashedly. And most of my family's still there. But he's like, why don't you just apply? Well, just see what happens. I'm like, all right, fine. So I apply. And at that time, they were really trying to build a portfolio. And they basically said, here's a blank sheet of paper. We got a load of money. We want to invest it in the U.S. We don't really have a ton of people with the originations and experience that you do. But with this blank sheet of paper, you can create your strategy and execute on it. And we got a ton of money right now. And this was great financial crisis. Everyone's running for cover. It was a tough time, right? I was fortunate enough to be at a firm that had dry powder, but it was still scary for everybody. And I thought, well, I'm a mid-level PE person. It's going to be years until I get my chance to actually drive a strategy and build a portfolio. And I thought, well, I'll take my shot. And if I fail, I'll come home and I'll find another job. But if I don't, we'll just see where it goes. So I made the move up to Canada, to Toronto, and have been here ever since. And while at CPPIB, it was a phenomenal opportunity, wonderful run. Over the 9 years I was with them, 10 years I was with them, I was able to build up a multifamily portfolio in the U.S., student housing portfolio, West Coast office investments, industrial, actually moved over to their private equity team and did a public to private leverage buyout as well. It was ridiculous sums of money when you think about it. It was about $11 billion in investments I was able to accomplish while there with a phenomenal team, but huge amount of growth, lots of excitement, great partners, wonderful sponsors, and it was a wonderful time. In 2019, I had a sponsor that left the firm and went to head up another pension plan in Canada, head up public markets and private markets there. And I was looking at his new place and just checking out the website. And at that point, I was in CPPIB's leverage buyout group, their private equity department. CPPIB liked to move a lot of their senior people around so that they can gain experience across the firm. Sure. I think it's not a common thing, but their view was that you're not a real estate investor. You're an investor in real estate. You could be an investor in public markets. You could be an investor in private equity, et cetera, which great. I love being on the other side. I love seeing things from a different perspective. But I was checking out the website for his new place, and I was like, oh, they have a real estate department. Oh, they have a portfolio. They don't really have anything in the U.S. I could do this for them. And I was literally about to pick the phone up and call him. And then I was like, why am I so excited for a job I don't even know exists? I was like, okay, let's take a step here, right? I was fine where I was. It was a great career. I'm so appreciative of CPPIB. But I was like, I think I owe it to myself to see what else is out there in real estate. And so I started putting out the feelers, and a recruiter called me with this opportunity. And, I'd given him kind of my big picture things of what I wanted. I'm like, it hits on all those points. I was super excited. It was a chief investment officer role, an ability to kind of build and shape another portfolio, lead a team of people, get them excited about a sector. And he said, but I just want to caution you, they focus on seniors housing. Is that a deal breaker for you? And I literally had to start because I had written my grad school applications essay to HBS on how if I ever had the chance sometime in my career, I wanted to change the senior housing sector and what properties are like and what the experience is like for families, for the residents, for the staff that are there.
It's so needed. That is definitely an area that I think most of us, at our age, we're starting to have to experience what that's all about. And it definitely needs a change. And, I was going to just make a quick note for those who are not investment banking and that type of background. When you were talking about the did you say managed buyout or leveraged buyout? Is that, which one was it? Managed buyout?
Leverage buyout.
Leverage buyout. So I first learned about that. So if you want a non-finance kind of background or non-textbook kind of book to learn about that's fascinating, read Barbarians at the Gate, because that talks about that whole process and you learn what it's about in a very fascinating way, and it's true story. So
yes, it definitely is. It's very exciting. And it's a great side of the business. I quite enjoyed doing a lot of that work. But in thinking about seniors housing and this opportunity, it was a no-brainer, but absolutely terrifying for me. In that I was like, this is my chance to do what I actually wrote about in my applications essay to grad school, of where I wanted to actually do something
with purpose.
Yeah, and it went back to a big experience of mine growing up. So when I was 10, my mother had a stroke. There was a hemorrhagic stroke, and it left her hemiplegic, so she's paralyzed on her right side, and it left her with aphasia, where she understands everything that you say, but she actually can't communicate back. And so I spent a lot of time, through the rest of elementary school, junior high, and part of high school in either skilled nursing, and when she got better from skilled nursing, to an assisted living facility, and when she was better from assisted living, to independent living. And even as like a kid, spending every day after school there, I was just like, these are not awesome places to be, right? Like they could be so much better. They're not great experiences for everybody. And granted, I was child, tween, teenager in a lot of them. And we were fortunate enough to be able to bring my mother home and care for her in home. And then we went through different types of caregivers, et cetera, until my dad and I just said, okay, we're going to do it. Let's see how we can pull this together, and you and I will figure this out. And so we did do that. But, I went away to college, we still sorted things out, and it's always been just pieced together, but it stuck with me. And when I came back to Southern California, I would continue to volunteer in continuing care communities, so that have assisted living, et cetera. And it was just, I talked to the residents and I'm like, now that I have this finance and more of a real estate background, there's so many things that you could do to just improve the experience from a relatively small dollar amount level, whether it's what the type of people you're engaging. I just kept thinking there's something that could be done better. And so this opportunity with Revera was just exciting for me in terms of being able to actually address that, maybe do something, use all the background and experiences I had from private equity and banking and understanding capital markets to bring to bear on a sector that I think, unfortunately, coronavirus really highlighted in terms of this. People didn't think about it. They didn't want to think about it. And there's truly a need there. So that's how I ended up where I am today. Circuitous and long, decided dominated.
Well, Noelle, that, what a fascinating culmination of your background to be able to be in this position. So I know that if you're pretty new in it, but I'm sure you'll have a chance to make a lot of impact while you're there. Today's podcast is brought to you by EDA, a human capital firm that provides leadership development for your top of the house executives. One of our services is assessment and selection. Whether you're hiring, promoting, or developing your talent, the right assessments can provide much needed insight. They reduce bad hires and help you identify key areas of strengths as well as development needs. If you're interested in learning more about our assessment and selection programs for your organization, please reach out at www.executivedevelopment.com. So along the way, obviously you had a very difficult childhood, where you had to take care of your mother, and I'm sure, is she still alive? Or are you still able to care for her? Great.
So unfortunately, I can't care for her as much as I wanted to. So until coronavirus, I'd been home. I would go home every month on the month, and somewhat relieve my dad for a weekend or so. And after I've had kids, bring all the kids home to see my parents. And it was a monthly trip from Toronto back to LA, which everyone thought was nuts, but was fine and something that I've done. So I'm very much longing to go back home, but haven't been able to do that trip with coronavirus.
I'm the same way. I try to go see my mother, who's 5 hours away by car every month. And it's important to stay connected with our families.
Absolutely.
What about along your path so far, the work path? What has been some of your more, maybe your worst experience that you've had so far, or, difficult things that you've gone through? Because, our program and our book is about inspirational leadership. So we want to help people who are going through things to know that other leaders are going through things too. We don't usually talk about them because we're busy leading our teams, but there's a lot going on in the background usually. And so is there something that you've been through that's been difficult that you really had to work through?
I think what's difficult is, and I can only reflect on it, and I couldn't, when I was going through it, really put my finger on what was being so challenging and what was so hard about that time. And only looking back, I realized the sponsorship part of any type of workplace, unless you kind of own your own business and don't really need to pay attention to clients, that I don't think is emphasized enough. And it's not a gender thing. It's man or woman. You need to have sponsorship from somebody that is in the room. Full stop.
Well, and talk about that a little bit, because you mentioned sponsor earlier, and talk about the difference between a sponsor and a mentor.
And so a sponsor is somebody within your firm that is basically willing to put their credibility, maybe not as much as their career, but definitely their credibility and some of their own reputation on the line for you when you're not in the room, either putting you up for opportunities, talking about you, and advocating for you internally in your company. I think a mentor you can think of as they don't necessarily need to be in your company. They're giving you advice. They're hopefully unbiased in what they're talking to you about and giving you that bigger picture. But a sponsor, I think very specifically, is within your own workplace, giving you that leg up, being in that room and speaking for you when you can't speak for yourself.
Yes. And so I just want to add on to that, because, we can do that ourselves as we're in companies. We can be sponsoring others, and it is important to have
Correct.
a sponsor for us as we're going up. But it's that, one of the ways I would describe what you're saying there is like reaching down and helping to pull up
Correct.
the person into that next level. So that's,
Correct.
I'm glad you're talking about that. Go ahead.
And I think it's not until looking back, it's a huge difference, right? And for whatever reason, in some places, some industries, they say, well, women just don't have that as much. And that's probably true, but I think it's a personality as much as anything else. People like to help people that look, feel, talk, act, think the same way as they do. And it's much harder to kind of take yourself out of that and want to pull somebody up that's different, thinks differently, approaches things differently. And I think, I don't think it was entirely cultural, but I think there's been moments in my career where I'm like, I'm having a really tough time trying to get a message across. I don't think I'm incorrect. But I'm not getting support, and I don't understand why. And when I compare it maybe to peers or other things that are going on, I'm like, what is going on there that I can't have that same path and that same ability to kind of drive forward with the support behind me? And it does boil down to sponsorship. I think oftentimes when you're going through school and there's a strong belief in the meritocracy of, here's my score, here's my financial results, here's what I've gotten, this should get me through. It's not the picture, not the whole picture, especially when you need somebody else in the room and you need that person advocating for you and sponsoring you in a different way, because those numbers enough are not going to be able to get you past. And I think I didn't realize that or appreciate that early enough. And I kept my head down, kept on going. But afterwards, peers and other people would say to me, you had a much harder time of it. And I think it was down to the sponsorship of, for whatever reason, I just didn't have it. I didn't cultivate it. It didn't work for me. You can't always force a lot of those relationships.
No, but you're making a great point about, I've experienced this quite a few times where I've saw people who will come out of a university, Ivy League school, whatever, they've got A's, they're A students.
Yeah.
and they get into the corporate university and they think, okay, I'm going to get an A. And they do their work at an A level, but there is all this peripheral. There's the corporate politics, which I do not think of as negative myself, because I just think, it's all about getting the right votes.
Yes.
It's sort of, if you think of a corporate politics a lot like government politics, it's like you have to have the right votes to get the laws passed. Same thing in the corporate. You have to have the right votes. And if you just think of it like that, it's helpful. And so, what did you do as once you figured out like, oh, I don't really have the sponsorship here? How did you handle it?
I'm sure I could have handled it even better. But I think my view, unfortunately, was that prior to having it pointed out to me, I was like, well, my performance should be enough if this is a performance-based organization, right? And so it was turning around, on an external relationship building basis of, I need to really focus on building way more relationships internally. And I had a good network base of internal relationships that had happened naturally over time. But then it almost had to become a little bit more of no, I need to be strategic about these relationships internally, and build those where I can. And also admit to myself sometimes where it's not going to happen. And these people have who they picked. I could keep on trying. I'm not going to count myself out, but maybe there's another avenue I have to try and push, because that may not happen. And I think a lot of it is also just coming to a realization of, where is the effort expense versus the potential reward, and being realistic about the probabilities of something occurring and not. And either being satisfied with that, or if there's a dissatisfaction, then acting on it and doing something else.
Yeah. And so did you stay in the company, or is that when you made a transition?
That is when I made a transition. And I think it's natural and it's fine, because all organizations kind of skinny as they go up. And I was probably late to the game in getting my own sponsorship on the table, and probably a lot of sponsorship that I had built. You can't control everybody above you. And if they're all leaving the company as well,
That's a sign.
Exactly. and in my view, I was like, I've just lost in a fairly short period of time, probably 3 to 4 very strong sponsors of mine. I'm going to start from ground zero, building a new network. How long is that going to take me?
Yeah. And there is a right time to strategically leave a company. One of the things that I've seen is when, people who are doing really well start to, sort of hit their head on the glass ceiling, whether it's male or female. Sometimes it's very strategic to leave at that point, go get a higher level position in another company. And if you really like this company, come back later at a higher level.
Yeah.
And so, we call those boomerangs.
and I wasn't, this is not a knock at all on any of my prior employers. They're all great experiences. And I think I was just very fortunate in that the experience that came up when I started to put feelers out there was one in which it was, wow, this is an opportunity I have been wanting for more than 20 years. And I can't believe that I have the good fortune to be able to do it.
Well, your hard work is paying off, obviously, and I can't wait to see what you do with it. Tell me a little bit of advice that you would give to others who are, maybe they're in an organization, they need to find a sponsor. What kind of advice would you give them?
I think for sponsorship, you can go very wide as well in terms of who can be your sponsor. Because a lot of people are in that room that may not be evident in your direct reporting line, but may still have a great amount of influence and be able to help you, and you alternatively help them. I think most leaders like to help people and like to see people succeed. Not all, but I think most do.
I agree.
And so seek them out, because it's hard when you're a relatively junior person to say, what do I have to offer you to a more senior person. And I remember I'd go into every single one of my meetings like, can I bring them a coffee? Like, what can I do? Like, do I bring you a pressed juice? Like, what can I do to what can I offer you? Because I feel like I'm a hindrance more so, but oftentimes if you're able to perform when they sponsor you and when they speak up for you, that gives that person the satisfaction of, I helped somebody and this is the good part of my job. And I made that connection, was able to bring somebody up. But I don't think it's universal, but I think those are the people we want to seek out that may not necessarily be in our direct line. So go broad, looking at a sponsor.
Find the people who want to help. And there are a lot out there. And I would even go as far to say, if you're in a leadership position and you don't want to help, you're not really a leader.
No, agreed.
You're in it for yourself.
Agreed. Agreed.
Because that's what leaders do.
And I think that also goes into the second piece of advice, which probably isn't the popular advice, but it's also just when you think of the long run, and this may also be as a result of, how my family was shaped when I was young, but at the very end, I would be so upset if people were saying about me, she was really great at that deal versus she made an impact on other people's lives, or this is what her relationship meant to me. Right. And so I would always focus more so on what kind of relationships are you building here, and what connections are you making across the world and whatever world you sit in, versus what are your nuts and bolts and bottom line P&L that you're actually producing at the end of the day.
Right. You're right. I sent you a form, to prepare for this, and what you answered back was so good, because, when people are standing around when they're at your gravesite, when, you're gone, you don't want them saying, oh, well, she built $11 billion,
it's so depressing. Exactly.
Absolutely. What great advice. Thank you, Janice, for being on the program. It's been great hearing your story. I do have one last question, though. Where did your family immigrate from?
My parents are from Taiwan.
Taiwan. Okay. Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing your story, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Bonnie.
A special thank you to our listeners for taking time to tune in to this week's Real Life, Real Leaders podcast. We hope today's story inspired you. Check out previous episodes on the podcast to hear from more industry leaders, and check back next week as we speak to another leader and hear his or her great stories of triumphs and messy struggles. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate, subscribe, and share. I'm Bonnie Hageman, and I look forward to sharing more with you next week.